And I have to say, Senator, when I testified in front of your committee, I got my testimony out of order. Very strict shot clock. And I got a little flustered. He said, relax, you know this stuff. Trust your gut. I appreciated that. Thank you very much, Senator.
Actually, what I said to him that day, I said, Carlos, who does your hair? So we'll all be there someday. So. Anybody hear the morning news? I just got off a train from Delaware, and after the news was from out of Vietnam, and out of the dinner last night, it ended very late between President Kim Jong-il and our president, and some amazing developments. There were photos, I guess, showing them shaking hands, hugging when the dinner was over. And apparently they reached agreement on a broad range of subjects. Kim Jong-il has agreed to fully fund the wall on our border with Mexico. And in return, our president has decided to lift the sanctions on North Korea and to withdraw all U.S. troops from South Korea. The money saved therefrom will be used to fully fund our surface transportation system in this country. And the president and both countries are expected to be co-recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize. It'll be at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Which is scheduled to be held on April 1st. Immediately thereafter, we expect to use and redeploy our troops to invade Venezuela. So, that's all I've got. If I had a mic, I would drop it. Right now. I don't like this podium. It's got all this junk on it and all this electronics. I have no place to put the wonderful speech that this woman right here, Rebecca, just wave at the crowd. This is my brains. My brains, folks. And
I'm sure I'll get somebody mad at me, but it's okay.
Oh, I don't need this. Isn't this fun? Do you think I get paid for this? Most people can't. But they've been paying me in Delaware, I guess, as treasurer, congressman, governor, and senator, 14 statewide elections. And we're 14-0, but it's still early. And I'm grateful to the people of Delaware for giving me a 6-year extension on my NOCA contract. And we plan to work very, very hard. And I look forward to working with a bunch of you. I want to thank Carlos for his kind introduction. And Carlos, thank you also for your testimony. And for many of you who've come and testified before us and met with us and given us good advice. Somewhere in this audience is a smart, beautiful woman who's a great leader in transportation. And her name is Jen Cohen. Jen, are you here? Where's Jen? Jen, would you stand up and take a bow, please? Nice round of applause. Our entire delegation, there are only 3 of us. But we and our governor, John Carney, love working for her. And she's, and you think I'm kidding. You're not. We're not. Well, let me say, I'm going to slip through this just a little bit. This is a great speech. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to ad-lib a fair amount, okay? We'll finish up by lunch. No, we'll finish up way before that. As you know, over the last several years, there have been a lot of promises made about infrastructure, funding infrastructure. I'm reminded a little bit of Albert Einstein. I don't know if you remember anything Albert Einstein ever said, but he really had a lot of great quotes. One of my favorites is, "In adversity lies opportunity." It's pretty good, isn't it? I've always looked at adversity and say, oh, there's got to be an opportunity here. We're going to put together a good team and go out here and fix this and conquer whatever challenges lie ahead. He also said, and this is one you're probably more familiar with, he also said, talked about the definition of insanity, do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result. And we always start off at every session of Congress by saying we're going to do infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. And we're not very good at keeping that progress, but a little bit of progress was made Congress last year, actually, on infrastructure, airport, aviation infrastructure, 5-year bill, good bill. And John Barrasso, I think, was John here with you earlier today, our chairman of our committee in the Senate. And we made bless you very much, rest you, sir. And we made good progress, a beautiful bipartisan progress on a major water infrastructure bill. And so we're pleased with that. Our committee is pretty good at working together across the aisle. And we like to try to set an example for others. And now we'll have a chance to try, after warming up on WRDA, Water Resources Development Act, we'll go to work with all of you on transportation. But one of my favorite songs is Hope in a Hopeless World. And a lot of people look at what's going on here in our nation's capital. They don't feel a whole lot of hope. But I think there's reason for hope. And I hope you're a little encouraged by what Peter had to say, and Sam Graves before him, too. But together with our chairman, John Barrasso, who I hope this is not being covered by the press, he's actually my friend. And but together with John, we've begun work on service transportation reauthorization. I think we have a real chance to bring it to fruition. Today in the world of transportation, there are a lot of difficult problems that need creative new thinking and some new solutions, and frankly, some old ones. And another thing that's really needed is just courage, political courage to do what we all know needs to be done. But as we begin this work to reauthorize the transportation programs, it's helpful to take stock of where we are and how we got here. First of all, we've got a transportation trust fund that's in debt. Some states are probably in a similar situation, but we're really in debt. Last year, we spent about $13 billion more from the Transportation Trust Fund than we collected in revenues. That's not sustainable. And if we look at the next 5 years, if we don't do something, it's going to get worse. And we'll add about another $85 billion of red ink. I was elected state treasurer right out of the Navy, Vietnam, and a veteran, and got to Delaware, got an MBA, and they elected me state treasurer. I was 29. And we had the worst credit rating in the country. We're dead last. Tried with Puerto Rico. They were embarrassed to be with us. And we couldn't balance our budget for nothing. And I've always been a deficit hawk. I believe that things are worth having. They're worth paying for. It's kind of old-fashioned around here, but I'm too old to change. But despite spending more than we collect, we still aren't spending enough to make the kind of dent we need to in a backlog of more than $800 billion of investments that are needed to rehabilitate $800 billion of investments. And that's just Delaware. Right, Jen? That are needed to improve our highways and our bridges across the country. As a result, we have a transportation system that isn't performing the way it ought to. 2017, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave America roads a D, as you probably know. Some people say it's a D for delightful. In some places it might be. Others a D for dog. It's probably, or dog meat. There's probably quite a bit roads, highways, bridges somewhere in between, but we're underfunded, and too many of our roads, highways, bridges are, as you know, in poor condition. Our roadways are also dangerous. Rebecca tells me that in 2017, more than 37,000 people lost their lives in crashes on our highways, which is up. And I think what's really up is pedestrian deaths, and that's not acceptable. Finally, our transportation sector is a major source of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to the global emergency of climate change that's facing us. I know some people don't believe in climate change. I just invite them to go over to Ellicott City, which is not too far from where we are today. Twice in the last 2 years, they've had 1,000-year floods. Somebody asked me, what is a 1,000-year flood? And I said, well, that's a flood you expect to get every 1,000 years. Well, in Ellicott City, they got 2 of them in 18 months. And that's hitting way over 1,000. And that ain't good. We live in Delaware. Jen and I live in Delaware. Anybody here from Delaware? Anybody else here from Delaware? How are you, ma'am? Would you like some coffee? How do you like it? The Delaware is 49th largest state. Believe it or not, we have more five-star beaches than any other state. Isn't that pretty amazing? Little state, no sales tax, and we're real proud of our little state. But our state is sinking. The seas around us are rising, and we're not a big state, but there were wildfires in California, Oregon, Washington, Montana last year. They were bigger than my state. We have raised a lot of soybeans in Delaware, lima beans, a lot of chickens. For every person who lives in Delaware, there are 500 chickens. Eat chicken. 500, that's a lot. But last year, a lot of our farmers in southern Delaware planted their crops in the spring. It rained. When it dried out, they planted their crops again. It rained. And it rained twice as much in Delaware last year as it normally does. In a lot of places, the same kind of thing is happening. A lot of places are not getting anything. In Alaska, the Iditarod, the famous dog sled race, the last 5 years, they've had to bring in snow in order to have the race. I like to say they brought in the snow from Arizona, but that's not true. But there's some crazy weather out there. And it has something to do with the amount of carbon in the air, more carbon in the air today than the last 400,000 years. Anybody from Ohio? Anybody from Ohio? Let me hear you say OH. Oh, that's pretty good. So we can spell in Ohio. No. Ohio State, Navy ROTC boy here, so nice to see you guys. But there's a Polar Research Center at Ohio State where a husband and wife research team, actually born in West Virginia. Anybody from West Virginia? My native state. Anyway, what they do and have done for years is lead research teams down to tallest mountains on the planet along the equator, climb those mountains, and they have the equipment that reaches through the ice, the ice caps, and measures as it goes down carbon, the presence of carbon in the air, the climate, highest level of carbon today in our atmosphere in over 400,000 years. That's how far back they have looked. For people to say this ain't real, it is real, and we need to do a lot of things about it. And one of those is to make sure as we do our surface transportation reauthorize, we take into account the serious matter of climate change and find ways to be more environmentally friendly with those transportation systems. Not just having more transit and that sort of thing, more electric buses and all. But anybody here from Michigan? Anybody from Michigan? How are you? Huge Detroit Tigers fan, huge fan. If I could be anywhere today besides here, I would be in Lakeland, Florida, trying out for the Detroit Tigers. At third base, they actually let me throw out the opening pitch at Tiger Stadium. The last week they played at Tiger Stadium. Isn't that incredible? Threw a pretty good pitch for my life goal was early on to be third baseman with the Tigers. I threw my pitch, 55,000 people cheered. And before I walked off the field, I walked over and I stood on third base and I said, "This is mine. This is mine." I don't know if our Michigan friends have ever been to the Detroit Auto Show. I go every year. We used to build more cars, trucks, vans in Delaware than any state in America. And 11 years ago, the car of the year was the Chevrolet Volt, V-O-L-T. Last year, the car of the year was the Chevrolet Bolt. The Volt, 11 years ago, hybrid, 38 miles on a charge, and then you switch over to gasoline. The Bolt, which was the car of the year last year, 140 miles on a charge. And it's been upgraded since it's now over 200 miles on a charge. And at the Detroit Auto Show last month, there were probably a dozen or more vehicles I saw from all over the world that get more than 250 miles on a charge. And that's where the auto industry is going. And it'll be a good thing. They're fun to drive. They're good for the environment. And a lot less emissions. But that's the kind of thing that we need to do in order to be more environmentally friendly. We have too many people sit around in our cars, trucks, and vans just waiting to get through traffic. And we can do smarter things, smarter signaling, and that kind of thing that we need to use new technologies to do. I want to mention autonomous vehicles as well. We have this opportunity to do transportation. We also have the opportunity to use this as one way to get used to or sort of pave the way for autonomous vehicles because they're coming. And I saw at Detroit Auto Show a lot of autonomous vehicles that are starting to come off of out of the design, at least the design portion of their operations. We had a hearing. It was about a year ago where there was a hearing on autonomous vehicles in our committee, Environment and Public Works. We had a fellow stand up behind me, and he was holding up a stop sign, like a red stop sign, and and he put two little pieces of tape on the stop sign. And it said, it would send a signal instead of the vehicles, autonomous vehicles recognizing that as a stop sign. It transformed the stop sign into a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit. So, pretty scary, huh? So we got to be smart as we deploy autonomous vehicles, but we have an opportunity to do it in concert with infrastructure. Let's see what else we have here. Construction management software can also help us reduce the costs of and environmental impacts of construction work. There may be other opportunities to modernize our transportation programs to ensure that their requirements are meaningful and to encourage the use of tools to improve the performance of our transportation system. The vision for a safer, more connected, efficient, climate-friendly transportation system will require one more thing, and that is money, something that Peter has already talked about. I'll just say this. He's from Oregon, and they have this road user charge. They have been working on it for 10 years. Rebecca just held up 5 fingers. That means 5 hours. You have 5 hours. Just kidding. In any event, they've been experimenting on road user charge for quite a while. We do a lot of Easy Pass on the East Coast, and what I envision something is kind of like combining road user charge, RUC, we call it RUC, with Easy Pass. I would call it Ruck and Roll. Ruck and Roll, and maybe is it a way to help fund transportation around the country. He mentioned in near term some extension of the user fees that we've had forever. Gas tax is about, I want to say 14 cents a gallon. Diesel tax about 24 cents a gallon, and I think the gas tax is worth about a dime now. The diesel tax is worth about 15 cents now. That's not good. George Voinovich and I, friends from Ohio, George and I proposed raising the gas and diesel tax 4 cents a year for 4 years, and then indexing it to the rate of inflation. We proposed that a couple of years ago, and amazing thing, we got reelected after having suggested that. And a big deal was made of it in my reelection campaign about 6 years ago. We won by 70%. And a bunch of states, 30 states, have raised their user fees. And if you look across the country, the Republicans that voted to raise their user fees, they've been reelected, I think, about 95% of the time. Democrats who voted to raise the user fees have been reelected about at least 90% of the time. The folks who did not vote to raise the user fees actually did worse in elections in those states. So that's, I think, reason for encouragement. You need leadership in those states, and what has happened is governors have stood up and said, we need to do this. And if we do this, these are the kinds of roads, highways, bridges that we'll build, and the improvements that we'll make. Peter alluded to earmarks. Earmarks, once one of my friends who was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee described the earmarks process in the Appropriations Committee, where they carve up the House and Senate members on the Appropriations Committees get to carve up a bunch of money and send it back to their states and their districts. And the chairman of the Appropriations Committee described it as pigs feeding at the trough. And that is part of what led us to get rid of earmarks. And Peter was talking about a way to sanitize it and clean it up. I think we can do that. And one of the nice things, it's hard to convince a legislator, a congressperson, a senator to vote to raise a user fee if they can't point to a project in their state that was funded. I do that all the time, thanks to Jen. She lets me do this all the time. And since in some cases, 80% of the funding is federal, when she has a ribbon cutting or a groundbreaking or something, she's good enough to let me come, and we talk about the federal contribution. One of the, if you're a state legislator in a bunch of states, and this is at least partly true in our state, if you don't vote, when I was governor, if you didn't vote for an increase in the user fee, when it came time to write the capital budget, your stuff didn't get in. Just didn't get in. Like to reward good behavior and frankly punish bad behavior. That's kind of what we did. All right, my time has expired. My time has expired. Let me just say one last thing on this. It's been about 6 months now, maybe a little bit more. I was invited over to the White House. They don't invite me every day. Although the president thinks I'm a lot of fun. Probably not. But invited about 8 congressmen, senators, maybe 4 members of his cabinet. And we all gathered around this big conference table. And the deal was transportation. And he had the press in. And before our meeting started with him, they had a bunch of press there. And they started asking him all kinds of questions. And he batted them all the way, And finally, after about a minute or two, they shooed the press out of the room. And President said, we're here to talk about transportation infrastructure. I'm not here to give a speech, I'm just here to listen. And which shocked me and pleased me actually very much. And he said, I was sitting right across from him, he said, Tom, why don't you go first? And I talked about what George Voinovich and I proposed. Make real the purchasing power, the user fees, the traditional user fees, and not forever, but index it 4 cents a year for 4 years and index it going forward. He cut me off, just like interrupted, and I thought, boy, the nerve of this guy. Who does he think he is? But anyway, he cut me off and he said, 4 cents, 16 cents, that's not enough. Over 4 years, we need it now. And it should be 25 cents right now. I looked at John Barrasso sitting right behind him. John's jaw was on the table. I looked at him, I winked. And I looked at my other Republican colleagues around the room. One of them, whose name will go cited here today, but when the meeting was over and the president came back again and again, raised the gas users, diesel fees 25 cents a gallon. He said, I'll take the slings and arrows. I know it's a hard thing to do politically, but I'll take the heat for it. And when I look back on that, I think maybe like you did on shutting down the government. So, but he said, I'll take the heat. And we walked out of the room and said goodbye, and it was a good meeting. I walked out, there was a press stake out there, and the press said, anything interesting come up? Anything interesting come up? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, there was. And they said, what? And so the president endorsed a 25 cent a gallon gas tax. God, they ran for the phones. I mean, they had to, but actually they didn't do that. They waited, and they waited till one of my colleagues came out, a Republican senator, and they said to my Republican colleague, we understand the president's call for raising gas tax 25 cents a gallon. And my colleague said, I don't remember hearing that. Really? I called Elaine Chao that night, and I said, Elaine, she's out right beside me. I said, Elaine, you didn't say anything in the meeting. She said, I know when to keep my mouth shut. So. But part of what we need to realize, leadership's always the most important thing in everything we do. And we need it in state houses, governors. We need it here, people like John Barrasso, myself, Sam, and Peter. We also need it in the White House. And several of my Republican colleagues on our committee said, if the president would make that kind of endorsement, they would be a lot more sanguine about voting to raise the user fees. But I think the key is to move toward some kind of vehicle miles traveled. And we have these pilots going on in Delaware and about 10 other states. Let's see, find out what works, and let's do more of that. Last thing on a serious note, I got off the train today, Jen, and a lady walked off the train with me. She said, I wouldn't want your job for all the tea in China. She really said that. She said, you must hate what you do. Why do you do it? And I said, I really like helping people. One of the best ways you can help people is make sure they have a job. And one of the best ways you can make sure they have a job is to create what I call a nurturing environment for job creation and job preservation. In my business, we don't create jobs. Presidents don't create jobs, governors, senators. But what we do is help create that nurturing environment. And transportation is a huge part of that, not the only part. Our workforce, there's a lot of others, the ability to export our products, R&D and stuff like that. That's all important. But she said to me, I wouldn't want your job for all the tea in China. But she says, it's never been this bad before. That's what she said. It's never been this bad before. And I grew up in Danville, Virginia. Anybody here from Virginia? How are you? I grew up in Danville, Virginia. No kidding, you lucky guys. Grew up in Danville, and the last capital of the Confederacy. That's what it was. Last capital of the Confederacy. People think it was Richmond. No, it was Danville. And there's a great song by the band called The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. And that some of you may remember. It starts off with the words, Virgil Cain's the name, and I ride on the Danville train. And but anyway, 150 years ago, what happened? Civil War. 800,000 men killed. Many more maimed, wounded. A lot of civilians killed. When the war was over, what happened? Our president was assassinated. His successor was impeached. We somehow made it to the next century just in time to fight not one but 2 world wars. Fought them, led them, won them. Cold War, led it, won it. World Depression, led the world out of the Great Depression. And when the sun came up on January 1st, 2001, we had the strongest economy on earth, most productive workforce on earth. We'd had 4 balanced budgets in a row with a Democratic president and Republican House and Senate, led by John Kasich on the Budget Committee, John Kasich. And we were the most admired nation, the mightiest force for justice on earth. And for those who think that we can't make our way through this and go on and do well, I think they're selling America short. We can do this. It's an African-American proverb that goes something like this: if you want to go fast, travel alone. If you want to go far, travel together. I'm one who likes to travel together. I think you are too. Let's go. Thanks.